Welcome to the Journo Brief, where we explore what's shaping journalism today. From big investigations to new trends changing how stories are told. Brought to you by the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism, this podcast goes beyond the headlines to reveal the innovations, challenges, and teamwork behind impactful reporting. Each episode features insights from experts tackling journalism's biggest issues. I'm Fola Folayan. Join us as we explore this evolving world, one story at a time. Journalism is changing faster than ever. New technology, artificial intelligence, and changing audience habits are reshaping how news is created and shared. So what's next? In this episode, we talk to experts leading the way in AI and journalism. They will explain how news organizations are using AI, the challenges it brings, and what journalists need to do to keep up. We'll explore how AI is transforming storytelling and what it means for reporters, editors, and news audiences in the future. The Journalism, Media and Technology Trends and Predictions Report, published in January last year by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, predicted that AI would become a key part of newsroom operations in 2024. At the time, 16% of media organizations surveyed had already assigned someone to handle AI-related tasks, while 24% planned to do so. By 2025, AI has already become a major part of journalism. News organizations now use AI in many areas, including automating tasks, analyzing data, spotting trends, and even generating content. According to CCIJ's data editor Sotiris Sideris, AI is speeding up data analysis, especially for large data sets. It is also improving traditional journalism tasks like building stories and identifying patterns thanks to advancements in AI models. For example, CCIJ has used AI to analyze election data. Yushi Wang, CCIJ's data analyst, explains how AI helped investigate Nigeria's 2023 elections, processing about 170,000 documents from the government's IREV portal. The challenge was to extract useful information from these massive data sets, since checking each document manually wasn't possible. Yushi says the AI used followed long-established machine learning principles that have been around for over a decade. So you as a researcher, data journalist, you've worked on several CCIJ investigative projects. The question is, how has AI played a role in those projects? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so this is there's this one project that we've used quite a lot of advanced AI, which is for analyzing the election result papers in Nigeria. They're in the government IR portal, where they uploaded around 170,000 papers. We were faced with this challenge about how to analyze these result papers. They're in the same format, but just because of the vast amount of it, make it impossible to inspect manually by human beings. So we were thinking of a way to extract the numbers and also read the most important components of that election paper. For example, where there's the annex stamp, the preceding officer name and signature. So these are important elements that legally it's required for an election paper to be valid. So those are some things we looked at. And at the same time, we were looking at how many votes for each party, for example, which is laid out in that election paper. But how to extract it from all of these papers, that is a challenge. What makes it more complicated is the fact that all kinds of papers are uploaded. Not only this form, there are random pictures uploaded. There are pictures with extremely low resolution. There is pictures that's rotated all around. So it might be not that difficult if you're a human being, like reading a paper upside down. You just turn your computer around probably. But for us to set up a pipeline with artificial intelligence, we have to first fix all of those, rotate everything to the right position. And then also there are pictures that are tilted. So we also need to straighten them to make sure that they're in the box, square box, basically. And then that comes to the extraction of information, actually reading what is in the table. So we used artificial intelligence to be more specific, computer vision, to read these elements and extract these numbers from the paper. There is a few steps that I mentioned already, but if we don't want to go to the technical details, basically you can think of it as, instead of having like a human being recognizing what is in the result paper, how many votes for each party, whether there is a stamp, whether this is the right paper or it's a paper for another election, we were able to train a computer algorithm to do this for us. And the part we developed the model for is mostly for the layout, to extract the table, extract which line is aligned with which party. And then we also use the Amazon Textract, which is for OCR, handwritten documents. And I'm sure they also have AI components at the backbone of their service. So that's mostly it. But this is a more traditional artificial intelligence, if you think about it. This is not the hype of generative AI helping you write articles. Not that type. This exists a long time ago. This machine learning, computer vision thing was there probably 10 years ago already. And we're using almost like a similar approach, the more traditional machine learning algorithm to train a model to finish a task, a very specific task. It's very specific for helping us reading this election paper.
I asked Yushi if CCIJ had concerns about accuracy while using AI to analyze election data for the investigative project.
Like, it's a standard process when you are building a machine learning algorithm to evaluate your model, if it's accurate or not. And we did it with a data set that a civic tech activist shared with us. So he had humans reading the numbers of a lot of papers as well. So we took a random set of around, I think, 10,000 papers. And then we kind of compare what we read with OCR with his results. And for those that doesn't match, we have human validators go through them again. I think we were at definitely more than 85% of accuracy with this. And it has to be like a random data set. So it can't be like you're picking this 10,000. Yeah. Like you just run a random pick algorithm and pick those. So this is basically standard process for artificial intelligence. For any model you are developing, you have to check the accuracy. You have to check how much percentage you're at and be transparent about it.
AI is also changing how we get our news. OpenAI, Apple, and Amazon are making deals with publishers to include news on their platforms. But there's more. Perplexity is offering publishers a way to share revenue, while Google has decided not to pay for AI-generated news summaries. At the same time, social media platforms like X, formerly known as Twitter, have updated their policies to use content without asking for permission or offering payment. AI-powered news aggregators are also changing how we access information. These tools summarize news in real time and even predict which stories will be important based on market trends. Paul McNally, journalist and founding director of Develop AI, points out that this is not a new issue. Publishers have worried about losing readers since the early days of the internet, when news content started getting copied and shared for free.
This idea of summarizing the news really is something that we've seen from the beginning of the internet, right? We were worried about that as journalists. I mean, I remember when I was in print magazines and we started digitizing our output, the first thing I think our publisher asked was, why would we do this? Because then people can copy and paste straight off our website and put it on a different website, and then we won't get the traffic or the eyeballs or the recognition, you know? And even though at that time this is like the early 2000s, like people were very adamant to tell him that, you've got to get with the program, you've got to move with this. He was kind of right in that sense, right? There wasn't a clear business model. And obviously, if you were on the business side in terms of media and back in that time, you could sort of see how this was the product. We were gatekeeping that product by the fact that it was on paper and in a magazine that you had to buy. And as soon as you broke down those barriers from a business perspective, you were diminishing your ability to make money, right? And I think on the AI front, that has become more obvious. It's not like it hasn't been happening for years, but it's suddenly way more obvious because, like I wrote about in my newsletter a couple of weeks ago, on your iPhone, there is already now an app that you don't really even install. It just comes with the new iOS, and it rewrites notifications, not news as such, but it rewrites your notifications in a summary form that it then puts onto your iPhone. And some of those notifications are news. So some people, if they've got the BBC app, the BBC are the people that have really flagged this as a problem, but it's true for most news apps. You'll have these notifications of headlines, and they get sent straight through the app onto your phone. And now iPhone is interrupting that, taking that notification, rewriting it for their own good, and then bringing it to you directly. The thing which obviously the BBC had a problem with is that it was rewriting them incorrectly. So, you spend endless amounts of hours fact-checking something, and then it goes out. You publish it even as just a notification on your BBC app. And then on the other side of the world, someone's handset literally takes that very carefully constructed notification, rewrites it, and fills it with errors. So on the one hand, that's bad for information, for clarity, for truth. But on the other hand, on a business model side, to your point, that completely also adds another layer that sits between the reader or listener or consumer and the people that are trying to make money out of this content.
Here's the issue. AI summaries often hide links to the original news sources. If people can get the main point without clicking on the full article, what does that mean for journalism? Will revenue sharing deals with AI companies be enough to make up for lost website traffic? How can publishers protect their content in a world where AI is taking over? To find out, I asked Abubakar Idris, a Nigerian journalist and 2023 Knight Bagehot Fellow in Business and Economics Journalism at Columbia University. Here's what he had to say.
I actually don't know if revenue sharing from AI-powered news aggregators will be able to compensate for the lost traffic that news companies are likely to see as a result of the growth in AI adoption. I guess the most important reason is simply the fact that you're splitting this revenue, and it wasn't a lot of revenue to begin with. And when you think about it from how much revenue the AI companies themselves are getting, they get only a decent chunk of revenue obviously is attributed to news-related searches and activities, but it's not all of their revenue. So when you think about it from that lens, they're only committing to giving up or sharing only a small size of their revenue, of their total revenue. And so once you take out that portion and split that with the news companies themselves, and obviously there are so many news companies that would be looking to earn a cut of that revenue. So it just continues to reduce the pie even smaller. Until it gets to the final publishers. So it's very hard to see how that model of constantly shrinking pie, when you think about it, how that would work effectively for a news publisher. It just doesn't provide enough revenue to offset the lost traffic. And traffic itself, is always a good metric overall, but it in itself hasn't been one of the key metrics that shows how much revenue a news company can get these days is now down to a lot of things that they can do in terms of other activities like, say, subscriptions, direct sales, newsletters, and all those type of things. These are the other ways that news publishers are looking to offset the decline of possibly of the number of people visiting their website. They're looking to capture more audience in a different way, and also to provide more high quality advertising that they can price differently. I think maintaining control over their AI, over their content, will be significantly tough in an AI driven world for many reasons. The first is, how do you even start to put those type of guardrails over your content? To do so, you have to have effective technology that is able to detect when a human is on your page and when an AI is scraping through your content. These are, even though in some cases it seems like very simple fixes, you just put on robots.txt and you're able to discourage them from scraping. But that is only a principled approach to doing it. It's up to the companies, the AI companies themselves to accept whether or not they want to follow that standard and respect your robots.txt settings. If they choose not to respect it, then it means you as a publisher need to do more work. You need to find a new form of technology that would help you to maintain full control over your content. And that is a lot of work, because when you think about how media companies work today, they do not consider themselves to be tech companies. Even though they are primarily publishing on the web these days, many of them are shutting down their print publications. They still do not fully consider themselves to be tech-driven. They rely on tech, but they don't consider themselves to be tech-driven. So when you ask them or you try to see whether or not they have like product teams or a large number of or a decent pool of software developers who are thinking about non-content and publishing technologies, it just shows you that they just don't have that in-house capabilities to be able to fully protect their content. However, there are a couple of things that they are likely to do. For example, they could be more proactive to sell access to their content directly to the AI companies. This way, this form of licensing, it allows them to price their content super early and to reduce the ambiguity, or should I say, this behavior by AI companies, which would happen anyway, to scrape the content of these news publishers. So it's basically news publishers stepping up to say, okay, don't scrape our content for free. We'll give it to you for a price. That is one way. And if you're not willing to abide by that policy, then the news publishers have to start thinking about alternatives. And this could range from blocking the websites or the URLs of certain known AI companies, including their partners that are involved in scraping content. Obviously, that is not an effective approach either. Another approach would be to continue to find a way to reduce viewership on the web itself, the website itself, moving more readers into the mobile app of the news publishers, which again is a difficult thing to pull off. Overall, it's just very hard to see how a news company or publisher can control access to their content in an AI-driven world. In order to do so, they would have to develop sophisticated technologies to help them achieve that, which is something that they've not been historically good at, which is something that is also not in their, should I say, what they consider to be their core capabilities as a publisher. So that makes it very challenging for them to step up and protect their content the way they should. The last alternative would be simply to serve a warning and desist order to the companies, that every time or anytime the news publisher finds out that they've scraped content illegally, they can threaten to sue. But obviously, we all know that litigation takes a long time, and it's not something that news publishers want to always be pursuing because of the lengthy process and the cost. But it is something that they could, put out there just so that they can force or use that as leverage over the AI companies, particularly if the news publishers are working as a group instead of individual publishers going to court every single day. So that way they'll be able to achieve some level of leverage over the AI companies and force them to respect the content that the news publishers are publishing, and also reduce the tendency to ignore the robots.txt orders or settings from these news companies.
Nonprofit news gives power to people, but power doesn't come for free. Your support ensures that our data, visual, and investigative journalists work tirelessly to produce top-notch, impactful journalism that you can trust. This work doesn't happen without your support. To support CCIJ, visit www.ccij.io/support.
In January, the BBC raised concerns about Apple's AI-powered news summaries, saying they often misrepresent their stories. Apple's AI, which is supposed to pick out key details, has been rewriting BBC headlines with serious mistakes, sometimes even saying the opposite of what was originally reported. One example shows how unreliable these AI-generated summaries can be. Apple's AI wrongly claimed that Luke Littler had won the PDC World Darts Championship hours before the event even started. In another case, it falsely reported that Spanish tennis star Rafael Nadal had come out as gay, a completely made-up story. This raises big questions about AI in news. Journalism depends on accuracy and trust, but AI-generated mistakes can spread misinformation and damage public confidence. Should news publishers demand stricter rules for AI use? Abubakar Idris believes that fighting for more regulations is a losing battle. Instead of resisting AI aggregators, he argues that media companies should innovate by developing their own AI tools and creating better ways to engage their audiences.
News organizations could technically fight for stricter regulations on AI aggregators. I think that is possible, but it is at the same time a losing battle. A lost cause, I would say, simply because it suggests that media companies are not innovating. It takes them back to the 1990s in a sense, when they all had this very solid models of publishing or running a news business, where you had the news on the one hand, and then you had advertising, and then you had classified ads on the other side, all of which fetch revenue for the business, either through regular advertising or through subscriptions or one-time payments for news. All of these things drove traffic, or rather drove revenue for publishers in the 90s, or at least up until the 90s, when the internet came on board and people started using e-commerce platforms like Craigslist or eBay to auction out stuff or to carry out marketplace transactions that would typically have happened thanks to news publications. So if we look at it from that lens, a Craigslist today or an eBay could easily have been a product of the New York Times or the product of a Wall Street Journal, but it just didn't happen simply because news publications were not innovating enough, were not thinking about the future enough, and so they let that model go. And it was so bad that even when Craigslist and the others stepped up, this publisher simply just let them, and they didn't stand up to introduce a new alternative that will keep them viable. They didn't do anything competitive enough to at the very least be as competitive as a Craigslist. If they had done so, perhaps the business of news would be different today, at least for web publishing would be very different today, but they didn't. And so now, almost 30 years in, we're thinking that when we think about the business of news, we only think about it largely from a subscription or advertising driven environment that is focused largely on news content. But that was not the case up until the 90s, for example. And so when you think about it from that lens, there is a problem with media innovation that has happened and continues to happen and makes the media ecosystem feel more reactionary to things that are happening. For example, social media came on board. Now everybody has to do what social media tells them to do, whether it's Facebook telling you that it will prioritize videos. Now news publishers want to do videos. AI has come on board. Now news publishers are thinking, do we get on board with AI? Do we sell our content? Do we get on aggregators? All of those things are very externally focused and they are not real product innovation. So it means the media business itself is vulnerable to all this external innovation that is happening. And so they need to take a step back rather than think about fighting AI aggregators. Why don't they build their own, for example? Why don't they step up to the competition? Why don't they do more AI innovation with the same content library that they've had for decades, for years? You know, in some cases, over 100 years, for some publishers, they can do these things. Rather than simply try to fight the AI aggregators, which again is a lost cause because the AI companies are going to scrape content where they can find them, even if they don't find it they don't get access to a big publisher like the New York Times, for example. They will still scrape it off a Breitbart, a Drudge Report, or any other publication that's out there that allows them access to do so. So it's very much not the right approach. Fighting doesn't work out here. They should, roll out their sleeves, get into the business of media product innovation and think about ways that they can play actively in the AI space beyond being a provider of news, to begin to add value to that ecosystem, either from a training perspective where they are training AI models or they are training, developing aggregators themselves. All of these things are ways that they can also play in the space. And then critically too, as AI becomes more predominant, people are beginning to want a different type of interaction with news companies. They want to see more comments. They want to be able to engage the content deeper. They want to be on the comment section discussing what the news is about and leaving their thoughts. But when you look at it, many media companies do not have comment sections enabled. And when they do, they randomly turn it off for some articles. They leave it on for some articles. That is how social media has been able to win over active users compared to news publishers. And again, news publishers are screaming and saying that, traffic is not coming from social media. Meanwhile, the way that people engage with news is they want to share their opinions. They want to share their opinions on a specific article at any moment in time. And news publishers do not give them that option to do so. So there's a strong lack of product innovation that is glaring in the media ecosystem. And so it just doesn't make sense for them to spend their efforts fighting AI aggregators. I think what they should be doing instead is competing and doing more innovation so that they can step up to these AI aggregators as opposed to trying to destroy them or fight them, is what I think.
The Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism, CCIJ, is growing fast. We're building a powerful network of journalists, photographers, data scientists, and students from Africa, Latin America, Asia, Europe, and North America, working together to tell impactful stories. Want to stay in the loop? Sign up for our newsletter and be the first to hear about opportunities, events, and groundbreaking investigations. Join our community today at www.ccij.io.
As AI changes journalism, the big question is, how can journalists keep up and stay relevant? Paul McNally says the answer is to focus on investigation, finding news stories and information AI can't create on its own. On the other hand, Abubakar believes journalists need to learn new skills like using AI for data analysis and creating multimedia content to stay competitive.
I think this is the biggest challenge for the modern newsroom, simply because many news companies do not allow their reporters to use AI for many of the tasks that reporters tend to use them for. So, for example, in some newsrooms, reporters are discouraged from using AI to generate text. Reporters are also discouraged from, inputting their drafts into AI for AI systems for different activities. And so there's that practice has been discouraged for many journalists across the board, at least that I've seen. And in many other cases, journalists are just not trained to be part of the process that is not news gathering and news writing. And as a result, many journalists don't know how to use, don't know anything about data analysis, for example. They don't know anything about video production, audio production, and stuff, and related multimedia. Their competency is largely tied to writing and publishing. And so that handicaps many reporters, I would say. And historically, that hasn't been much of a problem because you still write an article. The article has to go on print or on the web. People read it, they share snippets. That has always been the trend for much of print-based journalism. And so it made sure that reporters are able to still do the best work and write the best things and build up their skills in writing. But with AI today, the key thing it has done is to commoditize that idea of writing in a way that it can replicate any of the best styles, at least to an extent, very quickly. And so for news reporters today, that aspect of writing has become a lot less competitive to an extent, particularly for entry-level reporters. So if you want to stand out as a reporter today, you cannot solely rely on good writing. You have to augment it with something additional. Say, for example, solid understanding about data, good understanding about financial statements, being able to pull out more details from various kinds of information and being able to visualize it in different ways. So it requires today's journalists need to have multiple skills that is beyond writing, beyond interviewing, and be able to demonstrate those skills in their day-to-day jobs. So the way to stay competitive in this space would largely be to upskill, use AI to build up new skills in data analysis, in visualization, in image and multimedia content generation.
Investigative, uncovering stuff, all the things that have become incredibly hard to do is the only thing that journalists are going to be able to do even by the end of this year, I think. I just think that there is going to be no value or space for journalists to do anything but the sort of premium top shelf stuff that you kind of learn that you're going to do in university. And then often a lot of jobs are just not that. Well, I think those things that you're mentioning are the things that are going to survive, right? Because, that's you guys are engaging with AI tools and you're producing investigations that are uncovering things that people would not know otherwise, right? It's new things, new stuff, right? To kind of make it blunt. And I think that is where the blue sky space is now for journalists, right? Ironically, because for years people have sort of, podcast is a great example, right? It went through this insane investigative boom where people were very interested in serial, and then everyone was trying to copy that, and people were pumping money into investigative podcasts, and I benefited from that. And then someone looked around and went, wait a minute, there is no real business model for this, because the money that you make from those things is not very rarely enough to cover the costs, right? And then people contracted, and then they all became talk podcasts, became the top 5 podcasts in the world are often just 2 people speaking, right? Sometimes for hours, which was the opposite of how people were sort of taught, you need these things to be 20 minutes max, those kinds of things, right? Highly edited, all of that. So I think, and that when you add on top AI generated content, I think the space for journalists is not really in content creation, right? Okay. It's in because that stuff is going to become increasingly easy. And I think to your point, this sense of control is going to get lost, right? So the idea that your phone can write your news for you is not going to go away, right? Android and iOS, Apple pretty much own that space globally, and they are going to put a barrier between you and the content produced.
These ideas show a clear way forward. The future of journalism isn't just about writing more articles. It's about finding the stories that truly matter and using every tool available to tell them in impactful ways. The big question is, are journalists ready to adapt and grow?
This podcast is produced by the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism, a nonprofit media organization dedicated to a collaborative approach that combines visuals, investigative journalism, and data science to tell unique stories, highlighting underrepresented communities. For more information about who we are, visit www.ccij.io. Read our investigations at www.visa.news.